I would like to invite Professor Sheila Mishra to give the keynote address.
Perhaps this is not the topic in which really I am an expert to talk about it, because I retired in 2015. And even though I've been doing some work post-retirement, it has all been in Madhya Pradesh. So it doesn't really fit with recent trends in Maharashtra. And I'm sure there are many people working and I'm not really clued into their work. But so I thought, since what can I say the best? So even though it is prehistory, I think in the second half of my career, the real focus was on Gori and Morgaon. Morgaon was, Shushma was with me in almost every day of research. Reza was also there for at least 2 years out of the 4 that we excavated. But I think that since most of the people in this audience have had multiple accounts of Gori and Morgaon, so I'm going to skip over it very fast. And I'm going back to maybe earlier part of my career when I was actually learning about Maharashtra prehistory. So what I want to emphasize here is how I developed certain, I think of them almost as light bulb moments. In my experience, I think you need a lot of patience in research. By being very busy and working very hard, you don't understand anything very often. Very often it takes time. So I remember those moments when you've been working and you've been thinking and there's something that you don't understand. And then suddenly you accumulate a certain amount of data and it suddenly clicks into place. So, so when you communicate this to people, sometimes you think, Madam to kuch bhi bolti hai, bina kaam karke she makes all these things. But behind that, it is actually very often it's a very fast process. But behind that fast process may be years and years of drudgery. But still, it's the pleasure of the research is when something suddenly clicks. So I've had many moments like that through time. Many of them are working in Maharashtra prehistory. So basically, I want to share those with you. And I also want you to use those insights, because those are things which are useful to everyone. You just realize it at once. So also, I think we should, when I started, like prehistory in Maharashtra started, the only prehistory that had been done was Robert Bruce. Basically, on a handful, there was Didier and Patterson, Camille and Bouquet, like some few strange things, but the solid thing was Robert Bruce. And Robert Bruce did work in a Deccan trap zone as well as a quartzite zone. And his idea was, he had only 2 phases of Indian prehistory, Paleolithic and Neolithic. And Paleolithic was not, he never found it in the basalt zone. So everybody had the assumption basalt zone was avoided by Paleolithic man. Now when I came, this is much beyond, after Brucewood, but also quite a bit, there have been like 25 or 30 years of solid work done in Maharashtra. When I joined Deccan College in 1976, maybe many of you were not even born then. So, next slide. So look, these were in 1952, Sankalia published a small pamphlet about Gangapur Paleolithic industry. And basically that was when the Gangapur Dam was under construction. Some geologist was doing exploration, one Sony from Ferguson College, and he was a perpetual PhD student. So he actually wanted to do his PhD at that time, and when I was there, he was still registered with Rajguru for PhD because he was a professor. He was very competent. He was I think a very pillar of the geology department in Ferguson College. But he reported finding these hand axes. So Sankalia came with him, and they explored the open trenches, and they found Echelian at a number of places, and he immediately published his book. And he's illustrated many of the artifacts. So, you know, you don't have to, his maybe description of the tools is now archaic, it wouldn't be standard today, but you can see the artifacts, you know what they were. And he also, I recently really appreciated this about Sankarya. Like he was criticized for being just details, no overview, no. I mean, what details are so important. He was severely criticized by Kosambi for his, pre and proto history of India and Pakistan, because you just can't make sense of it. It's like, and that is true. Okay, that is a true criticism of him. But if you want to know what he found, Sankarya is the best, because he has a picture, he has a section, he has a location map. And these three things he knew he has to have, and those were his priorities. As soon as he started the department, he was looking for the draftsman, he was looking for the surveyor, he was looking for the photographer. Because he knew that documenting his finds was #1 thing. So when I came, this was the department, this was standard operating procedure. I didn't realize like how critical this was. You shouldn't criticize other people, but there was an earlier book written on Indian prehistory, Mayurbhanj excavation. You go to that, the drawings are, what? They're so amateur. You can't tell what they found in that excavation, which was in 1949, or just immediately post-independence. It was a tremendous finding. But today you can't make anything of it. Okay, it is Ashuvian, ठीक है. उसके आगे क्या? But you can see, and then the Archaeological Survey of India also under Joshi and Sali did excavation at Gangapur. That was much later, 90s, but still early, 66. And almost immediately after Gangapur was his work at Nevasa. So Sankarya was again finding the Ashuvian at Nevasa. Then Corvina started working at Nevasa. And she found even a site with even more tools at Chirki, which is like part of Nevasa. And then Sali also the site of Yesen Bantni. So all these things, on day one when I came to the department, these are all there. So this idea that Deccan track was avoided by Paleolithic people, it's obvious. It's refuted. Although things hang around, once something says it never gets out in India, but it is actually refuted. But it still remains that if you just go for a walk in anywhere in the Deccan Trap area, you are very unlikely to find handbags. But as soon as you come on quartzite, you're quite likely to pick up something, pick up a tool. So Fort was not wrong, but his inference was wrong. So this was bugging me. And I was thinking, like, what could it be? Next slide. So this was my first light bulb moment. I read everything. I reviewed all the IRs. I collected every single example of finding Ashuvian within the Deccan Trap context. And what comes out is that, the sites in Deccan Trap area, they are less in number than quartzite, but they are usually much better quality sites. And my conclusion was that basalt tools, like this, the reason for this is the difference between the properties of the basalt rock versus quartzite rock. So basalt is made of they have minerals which have formed not on the surface of the earth. So they are unstable when they come to the surface. They weather fast. They chemically deteriorate. Whereas quartzite is metamorphosed sand, which has one of the most stable minerals on earth, mostly quartz. So it has much less susceptibility to chemical weathering. So it can be on the surface for some time. At that time I thought maybe forever, but I think quartzite also weathers, and there is a limit to its to how long it can be on the surface. At that time I had not done any exploration, but now I find that quartzite areas don't usually have the very earlier Ashuvian.
And what people call Acheulean is actually may not be Acheulean. It should be better called Paleolithic, and then you should maybe do some more research whether it's Acheulean, pre-Acheulean, post-Acheulean, or whatever. It's pre-microlithic. So that was, that was the division, Paleolithic and Neolithic. So maybe put it in Paleolithic and then see what it is and how old it is. But my impression is I still have not worked extensively in any quartzite area of India. There is not really the very looking stuff that we get from, especially this Bhima basin. So now, those sites which I worked on for so many years, partly with Sushma, is Bori, Morgaon, but there are many places where we get one artifact from something. So basically, it's now very firmly established. People were living in all the areas, and the only thing to understand is whether there was a chance of the evidence getting preserved or not. So when you're looking at something, that also at that time there was an idea that all of this Paleolithic could be very young. But I never believed that idea, because I think there cannot be a huge mismatch. You use all the data you have, and then you think what is the most reasonable. So perhaps Sankalia can be a little bit like, actually how old the Acheulean was only a discovery of the 80s. So the publication of Autobite Gold, I think 79 or something. The 60s there was a little bit of work. The work started earlier, but Mary Leakey's publications were then, and the dating was somewhere 90, in that range. And it was a shock, because I was doing my first Paleolithic, my first prehistory course in Canada, and the teachers were not believing that older one is 1.8 million. Is it possible? Now it's like, yeah, the first rule, So the dating, the oldest tools were there, but even the Acheulean is so old, was even a bit later. But of course, I was reading the literature. So I knew that the Acheulean in Africa is like 1.4, that was the date at that time. Now they've pushed it to about 1.8. So the earliest Acheulean is this. And I could never accept that something is one. Also, there's a very close resemblance between what we are now calling large flake Acheulean in India and what you have in Africa at 1.8 million. So I just could not accept that this thing which is 1.8 million in Africa is 80,000 or 40,000 or 20,000 in India. It just doesn't make sense. And especially there's so much close resemblance. So by the time we were working at Morgaon, and I remember I had all this stuff on this blue table in the lab, and I was just like, what is it? How much can you be doing? And also the Bori stuff was there. So I think the idea that the Indian Acheulean is somewhere equivalent to the African rather than the European is now fairly well accepted. And people who don't accept it, I think they just don't have knowledge of how much data is there. Okay? So one thing also, which is counterintuitive, another light bulb moment. See, like how we think about formation processes and preservations of sites is based on our personal experience, which is very short. Even if you live for 100 years, even if you extend your life to 110, in the lifetime, in the time span since Acheulean, it should be somewhere 700,000 years. That is just not even a snap of the fingers, not even the full breath. So we are evaluating processes over such a short time. So the things which we see, which are very destructive, they are actually things that act for a very short time. So some artifact, getting into the river gravel, or some artifact, some geological process which is fast, but which actually acts for a short time, that those are the things we think are important. So in Indian archaeology, we have the secondary site, primary site. Sites which are lying on the surface are considered primary, and sites in the river gravel are considered secondary. No, my friend. Anything which is that old, there are hundreds. So basically, you have to think, you have to have a mental thing that maybe 0.1% or less than that has ever survived. That whatever has survived, a lot of it is buried, still buried, and you cannot access it. So we are only looking at things that were buried and are currently being destroyed, either by natural processes like erosion or cultural processes like JCB digger. That brings it out, that we see it. So whenever you find an artifact on the surface, you have to think, where did it come from? Because it could not survive in the surface for that long, so there should be some place where it's still buried. This is how you have to think. So slow processes acting for a long time are the ones which are the most destructive for Paleolithic archaeology, and even to some extent for even later periods. The first thing for a site to be preserved is to be buried, and the first thing for it to be found is to get exposed. So we are looking at very little. So when you don't find something, it means nothing. So, but how do you deal with a subject where you have so much missing data? You cannot just say, you cannot just say, okay, head. You have to use what you know to infer what had to be there. So we know, I use this, if you have a tiger, you don't need the whole animal to know that the tiger exists. Even one hair, we can do DNA testing, and you know that there was a tiger. And it doesn't matter if that's all you have, it proves there was a tiger. So even if you don't have a lot of sites, man lived in here. And then if you think about, just about biogeography, about how plants and animals distribute over the earth, you cannot have, one population in Isampur and the other one in Balakot. No, it cannot be like that. People would be everywhere, but we do not find the sites everywhere. So the main reason for not finding them everywhere is not that people are not everywhere, but they are preserved only in very special circumstances. So making an idea of how great the population was, but how many artifacts are there, is a ridiculous reasoning, because there's no link. The link is with these preservation processes. So I think it's much better to make it on some kind of trophic level. Like if Homo erectus was vegetarian, then he was much more abundant. And if he was a top carnivore, he must have been because the top, in the food chain, as you go up, you become less number of you. So I would say like Homo erectus would have to be, more common than tigers and less common than deer. That would be a kind of ballpark figure. And maybe in tropical areas, there would be more vegetarian diet, so there would be higher population. In areas where you need more to depend more on animal diet, then you're in a different trophic level. But this is not using nothing. This is not making up the data. This is using something which is known to understand what you don't know. Okay? So this is how we deal with not with the missing data. And then you have to accept. If there is no data, then do not write papers about it. Okay? Wait for the data. If you can say something, so even when we say something like, I don't believe that people were absent from this area, it's based on this thing that we do know. Okay? Next page. So once this paper was there, this was my first light bulb moment, ages ago. And I think this is still something that most of the people which I talked to, it's not, once you get that idea, it's so obvious, you think that, it's just very common sense, it's very obvious. But until you get the idea, it isn't obvious. But this is one thing that I want everyone to start with. This is just a starting point. The second puzzle in Maharashtra, this is still at an MA level, before I actually started working, was this is the other thing. When you get some conclusion that doesn't make sense, it didn't make sense. Quartzite has less soil cover, it's less ecologically rich than basalt. Then why humans would avoid the rich area and go to the poor area? Didn't make sense. That's why that was my first reasoning. Now there was another thing that didn't make sense. At Chirki, Sankalia was trying to build up the sequence for Indian prehistory. Because he had Lower Paleolithic and there isn't really Mesolithic, but he thought that he had a level with hand axes, then a level without hand axes. So he made it as the type site for the Indian Middle Paleolithic and basically for Indian Stone Age. That was actually his objective to make this thing. Now, the problem was that the Middle Paleolithic and the Acheulean at Mimasa, they were in the same gravel bed. So geologically, there could be no separation. It was only a typological separation and slightly like upper layers maybe Nivasi. And this was like one of the, because Sankalia was the father of Indian prehistory. Like when he said it, saying he's wrong was a big thing. So, but it just didn't make sense. It really didn't make sense. So when I came to Technical College, Sankalia was retired. And I was not I was not here when he was the great man. So probably I was not so respectful. Or I am respectful. But I didn't think that if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't matter who says it. So so it doesn't make sense, but on the other hand, what they're reporting that they're from the same ground is true. No. That also cannot be challenged. The reason they were saying they belong to the same age, that is also, you have to accept that. But accepting the conclusion that, Middle Paleolithic and Acheulean are the same age, that I just didn't find it made much sense. So after I got this idea about how basalt doesn't survive the way quartzite was, I suggested that one difference between the Acheulean and the Nivasian at Nivasa was that the Acheulean was basalt and the Nivasian was on chert. So so this could explain it, this difference in the preservation potential of chert versus basalt. That could be an explanation. Acheulean and Nivasian are the same age because Nivasian is just a component of Acheulean in which the hand axes, being of basalt, are not preserved. And because basalt has no size constriction, it's in big boulders. So you can make big tools out of basalt, but you cannot make big tools out of chert because chert does not occur in such big sizes. So the Acheulean component in chert will be very less, whereas the main component on chert. I'm sure they were using basalt flakes also. But if you remove the basalt, then you get only chert flakes. And if you preserve the basalt, then you have chert flakes, basalt flakes, and Acheulean, the big tools. So this was my explanation for Nivasian. Nivasian is not very Paleolithic, it's part of Acheulean. So now you can see, it's not what you find. You have to understand the formation of the site, and you cannot just put them in categories of primary and secondary. You have to look at it, each site on its own, what is happening here. So even the typology of the assemblage cannot be properly understood without understanding or thinking about the formation process of the site. Next slide. Okay, so these are just some pictures, so you can, which was easily accepted because I've taken pictures of artifacts more recently. The field photographs are pre-digital age. So these are all from Mori, and you can see the variation is, and they are mostly hand axes. But you do have, you see this last one, it's a cleaver. You see these three at the end, they are not from the gravel. And that one in that, the last one on the top row, it's below the volcanic ash. And the one next to it, it's above the volcanic ash. So it's not that there's some phase of Acheulean that didn't have cleavers. You have a cleaver below it, a cleaver above it, but within that gravel assemblage, there are almost no cleavers. Although this one, the second one from the end on the last row, that one could be considered a cleaver. These two could be a cleaver-like. Next slide. So these are just some of the artifacts from Borgao. Mostly cleavers, but also I think large plates were functionally the same as cleavers. Okay, next slide. So I think some of these things I have already said. They only survive if you are buried fairly soon and only discovered if they are getting exposed. This is another interesting thing. That almost all the Acheulean sites in Maharashtra, they are associated with black tissue clay. Nivasa is an exception. And so the fact that all the there are fluvial deposits. All the rivers at the time of Acheulean were mostly depositing clay. So this indicates, I think, a different kind of landscape where these tertiary weathering products were still more prominent in the landscape than they are today. Because along with this having mostly clay, we do get some evidence, like especially at Borgao, there was one page we took where we got gravel and clay below it. And on the boundary between the clay and the gravel, there was one cleaver. Now this gravel which was on top of the clay, covering the hand axe, and you had the black fissured clay below it. When I was making the section, the gravel suddenly takes a dip. I was like, what is this? And then I suddenly realized that this is actually the gravel filling a crack in the clay. So this means that that hand axe was lying on a clay that already showed that shrinking and swelling properties, which are typical of the highly seasonal monsoonal climate. So the climate might have been slightly less arid during Acheulean, but was not a significantly different kind of climate. But the sediments being supplied to the rivers had a huge, much more clay than they do today. Then another thing is that when you get to Acheulean artifacts, they're almost always the flake surface, the stone is less weathered than the original surface of the stone. So even when the tool is in the gravel, it didn't originate from the gravel. It's brought from it's some weathered material brought from somewhere else, and it's got discarded in the river channel. So this shows first that people were carrying the tools around. And it also shows that they are selecting a certain kind of raw material. Then some of the Acheulean sites have components which don't exist in the landscape today. The classic thing is the Karwa Valley, where the Acheulean sand, this Makran Kale from the university did a whole project on it, and he found even the sand of the Acheulean has laterite in it. And at Sansford, we have laterite boulders in this gravel that has a few hand axes. So, but in the entire Karma basin, there is no laterite today. So the laterite has been progressively stripped off the landscape and was still present during the Acheulean time. Okay, and also another thing is, looking at the nature of the Maharashtra Acheulean, most of the sites look quite early. They resemble the early Acheulean of Africa. Whereas this may not be the case for the Acheulean everywhere in India. And all of the sites which have been tested for magnetic polarity show some evidence of reversal, which would indicate that they're more than 700,000 years old. So we can say that this is all to justify that Maharashtra is one of the richest areas for Paleolithic archaeology. Next slide. Okay, now I'm jumping to actually the Middle Paleolithic in Maharashtra is still a little bit unknown. But I think we are maybe misidentifying things as Acheulean, which should maybe go in Middle Paleolithic. And maybe that was just a time when there is not a lot of deposits preserved. I don't think that was a time of abandonment of Maharashtra. But you need to have the sediments being deposited, and you need to have them being exposed for them to be found. And then maybe archaeologists just have not done enough exploration. So I would prefer all those hypotheses rather than abandonment of Maharashtra. But we have a huge number of sites belonging to this microlithic period. And here I would like to give a little bit of another credit. Already Sali has appeared already in the Gangapur story. But when you look at the microlith story, he is even much more important. Because everybody thought the microliths are holes. They cannot be old, Pleistocene, Hoynism. And he was a person who did a huge number of field work. So on the basis of his field observations, he realized that these microliths are associated with sediments which cannot be holes. They have to be older. So, but nobody was really taking it very seriously, because even though he was a respected scholar, but didn't have that academic standing, at least at that time, that people could be quite, I mean, it's another light bulb moment for me. What you say sometimes doesn't matter as much as who says it. So, if Sankarya says it, more important than Sadi saying it, you know? And very often, I'm also in the less important what I'm saying. Anyway, so it was at Patni that he proved multiple ways that these microliths are in the Pleistocene, and quite early, unexpectedly early. He got date of 25,000 from Patni, so you had the date. And also, you had more than 200 fragments of ostrich eggshell, which is extinct. So that's, the two things are supporting. The date is on the ostrich eggshells. So, it's like now he's proven it. Hypothesis that microliths are not Pleistocene, just it's disproved. But I saw one book in Delhi College Library, Upper Paleolithic of India, which did not talk about Patni. I was like really shocked. But maybe, everywhere, Manush is not that important. Anyway, so this belongs to the late Pleistocene microliths. So we don't have, like most of the microliths in Maharashtra, they are in gravels. So we have not really got, we've got the idea gravels are secondary sites. We never chose to excavate any of them. But Aparna was doing MA thesis with me. And we went to, and this Kala site had been discovered by Corvinus. So we had previously visited that site. I visited that site with Corvinus. She has reported the microliths. So when we went with Corvinus, there was one section which had been, exposed by field leveling. So I thought this would be a good thing for her just to study that section, do the textual analysis. That is enough for an MA thesis. So we made a number of visits, and when we came, there was another field leveling. No, actually, that was my thesis was on that only. But later I had a project on the Godavari. And we went back, and there was another field building where they had, so at that time I had 25,000 rupees for radiocarbon date, so I was looking for things to date. And from this level, like recently level field, there were all these shells coming out of this clay. So the shells do live in clay. I thought it's a natural deposit. And I was removing the shells, and they were all breaking. I thought they were breaking. Until I realized they were not breaking, they were broken shells. That means it's something like a shell wound. So next slide. This is showing you the section, and the dates are there. So we have, from the first location, which the date is somewhere 22,000, no. Yeah, so we have 22,000 from the microliths in the gravel, and 21,000, see almost same date, from the gravel in the shell, in the clay. Next slide. So these are the shells. You can see some fresh breaks, some of them we did break. But you can see that these shells are old breaks because they have still all the sediment and everything. So these shells are being broken. Next slide. And some of them are charred. And some rocks also occurred which were charred. Next slide. And there were microliths. Next slide. And look at this shell which has been shaped into a disc. This is some kind of ornament. So the shellfish were being eaten, and the shell was also being used as raw material for making ornaments and who knows, maybe also some tools. So this is like one of the interesting things. Like, so now when we come to this is a very interesting data. Next slide. Okay, this got repeated. Next slide. Okay, so now I'm going, so this is just one of the late Pleistocene sites in India. As Sali had already shown, ostrich is common in these late Pleistocene sediments, and beads were being made from ostrich shell. So even if we do not have very ancient rock art surviving in India, we definitely know that they were making artistic objects and cared about decoration by at least 22,000. And 25,000 is the date from Sputnik. So it's not that there might have been rock art of that time. But that doesn't mean that the rock means it may not survive. What is the survival potential over 25,000 years of a rock painting? So there will be there are rock paintings of this age, even in tropical zones. So the thing is like, what are the conditions where it could survive? Focus on those and maybe we get the older ones. So this is showing this work on a tributary of the Godavari, Sindhupana River, where we got very early, very interesting Holocene record. So this site is called Shakshan Pimpri, and we were in the same Godavari project. We were working around, working in that area. So next slide. So this is the location map, and this is the section. So you can see there are two sections. We have a weathered gravel on bedrock. Yeah, Shushma was also part of this project. And we have, so in the gravel at the bottom, we have microliths with ostrich eggshell and a date of 14,000 years. Now, this is one of the youngest dates for ostrich eggshell in India. 14,000 is actually an abrupt arid event. And so this is in the bottom, this section. And then it continues, there's a black clay on the top. And in the irrigation channel at the edge of the terrace, we found pottery and shells in that irrigation trench, a very shallow trench, and also in the plowed field. And this date of the shells was 7.8 thousand years. Now, so this is where, you know, you discover something which doesn't belong in your discipline. But the people who are in that discipline would never look where you are looking. So the chapel in Maharashtra is very big, beginning some 3,500 years ago. Okay, you know, it's actually one of the latest in the world. But maybe it's just that they were not living in permanent settlements making houses out of mud. Because Indian archaeologists only look for mounds. If you do not make houses out of mud, you are not going to create a mound. So I really do think, next slide, you see this pottery, it actually matches with what J.N. Pal has called Chalcolithic pottery from Soan Valley, from Soan or Devan Valley. And he's called it Mesolithic pottery. So it has these precise designs, it has a very coarse texture, and it's in these big chunks. So this pottery is there. Now, you know, it's not 100%, I won't say that, hypothesis that there was no pottery at 8,000 years in India is rejected. No, because there could be the date of the shells and the date of the pottery. There is a link there, you know, not quite close. But people who are working in Neolithic of India should think where they're looking for the sites. And somebody will probably find this. Now the oldest pottery in Middle East is 8,000 years. They have a huge Neolithic before that, but the pottery is very late. It comes in very late. So if this date is right, then this is kind of going to be the earliest pottery in the Middle East. But not the earliest pottery in Siberia. Siberia, the pottery maybe 16,000 years. And this is just one of the micrograde holes found with that. Next slide. Oh yeah, and then, we also found some microgrates at another location, a few kilometers away, where there were shells where we got the same date, 7.8 kilometers. Yeah, next slide. Okay, so this is from a paper in 2003 where I compiled all the data, both from Narmada as well as Maharashtra. So you get all the radiocarbon dates and sections in one place. And as this was pre-digital era, I got my digital camera in 2004. I couldn't find all the pictures to give in this lecture. Okay, I have probably gone over my time. So do you want, yeah. So do you want me to continue?
You said something.
Okay.
Continue.
Yeah, so these are the sites of the Goat Valley. Goat Valley has all the sites in the arid phase of the late Pleistocene. All the sites have those dates. The dates are given here. You can look for the paper. It's on my research gateway. You can. Next page. So this is a Progra Valley. So this is another site which I found very interesting. So I already talked about Kalas, but at Sangamner, when I went with Aparna, there were a lot of these are house foundations in Sangamner city, and we found there was silt, black clay, a gravel, and the top part of the gravel was impregnated with dust. It was clay, and this gave a date of 18,000 years. So the Kala site, the gravel is not impregnated with clay. It's few thousand years earlier, before the climate became arid. And then this site, which has very arid climate, shows this, so the gravel is 18,000, and afterwards all this dust has impregnated. At Nivasa, we got a date of 12,000 years from one of the gravels that was above the Ashudian. At Sangamner, we got a date of 14,000. This date was from a gravel that Sali had submitted for dating. Next one. Okay, this is the Godavari Valley, and actually the section I want to talk about was Appegaon. So Appegaon, so you saw Shasha Pimpri, we had data of 14,000 and 8,000, but 8,000 was on the surface. But in Appegaon, we visited where Dr. Dev had excavated. And you got this date, so these are the dates from the excavation. There's a 2-meter mound, but only 100 years difference between these two dates. So somebody had cleaned the section for putting a mortar. So we just scraped the section, and there were all these hearts through the whole section, right up to the Nala floor. And the lowest date was 6,600, and the highest date was only 100 years before the mound formation. So this was very interesting. So like now you have early Holocene dates in Godavari Valley, and you have late Pleistocene dates in the Vema. This is another thing that doesn't make sense, because there's no difference in climate, there's no difference in geology. So why are the rivers aggregating the arid climate in Bhima and the humid climate in Buddha? So you can read, now that I'm out of time, read the paper and find my explanation. Next slide. Okay. So what I wanted to say, why I've added all these late sites, is I want people to understand that you don't have to be looking at very ancient periods to need to know about geology. So at Nivasa, there's the river split side in two. This is after the Chalcolithic. So Nani had done a lot of work on that. She has a very detailed thing. And this is at Kaundinya Pool, where the present river is here. But the mound is very elongated. And on this side, in this deposit, we found medieval pottery. So the river was probably flowing on this side, and the site might have extended like this. And after the medieval period, the river has shifted to the other side. And that could be a reason why this is the only site on the Vardha river. All of the sites might have been washed out. The Kaundinya Pool, a little piece remained because it might be the biggest site. Next slide, which is very, okay. So we took a very small section. We had 10 days. But still, what we got, a radiocarbon date of almost 700 BC from the bottom, very properly, and 290 from the top. And there is a flat deposit just below this date. So at one time, this site was flooded at that level of the habitation. And after that flood, it was very interesting, we got that level of 2 miniature pots and 2 human figures with all those holes in them. Like people were kind of feeling there was some supernatural reason for the flood, and they're doing some propitiation or something like this, some ritual of this. But we got beads, and this is just showing, like sorting out the dates. So we get this black and red pottery, or the red polished ware, the black and red ware, and the micaceous ware. So this is like how the pottery was coming out. Next slide. And this is the last slide. This is your director of this institute, 20 years ago, when he was also part of this work. So the final thing I want to leave you with is that we should really do work, field work, but less amount and more study of it. So this very tiny excavation, which we could, just a section scraping, could give us all this detailed data about the site, which Dixit's excavations didn't give. And in fact, because we did so little digging, every single potsherd was studied. And Guru Das Pete, who studied all the pottery, and that's where he developed his ideas. He found some sherds in the lowest levels, which are part of the Chalcolithic of Vidarbha, which were not reported at all by patient. Probably because he had so much overwhelming material to study. So I think maybe at some point, this will not tell you about structures. This may not get you the best antiquities. But at every site, this is good. And also like, Dixit didn't have radiocarbon names. He didn't have all the specialists to do paleobotany and faunal remains. So it is worthwhile doing these tiny excavations and studying everything. So here I will make a request to ASI. They have given so many limitations of what you can do. Like now if this is a 10-day excavation, then they will only allow you to do that one thing. You have to wait another year before you can do another 5 days on them. So there should be some recognition that projects have different durations. And of course, like when you're taking a big site and making a big excavation, then I agree with them. Don't do 2 of them. And that this will continue for maybe decades. But if you just want to have update a site which has already been excavated, apply some techniques which are available now which weren't available then. And also for a site which hasn't been studied, to plan your study. These kind of very small excavations are very important and they should be encouraged. So thank you for patiently listening to me. I saw that I had more than half an hour, I'm a bit relaxed. But so I thank you for listening because very often I fall asleep after somebody talks for 15 minutes. So I really do thank you. So okay, all the best for the future of Maharashtra. I think anybody who wants to work, we are just scratched the surface. We don't know anything about anything. Don't worry if what you find out is not what is already published because nothing has been done. Those people have not done wrong work. They are not misreported. But it's so little. And at the same time, you do make a conclusion from your little data. That is not the sin. The sin is not changing it with more data. So if you are the person with the more data, it doesn't match with the previous data. It's okay to reject it. It's not an insult to that earlier person. Because as long as that earlier person has also interpreted it according to what is known at the time, that's all you can do. You reinterpret, somebody is going to do more. So as we accumulate it, it becomes less likely that you will completely shake the foundations. But we are in the phase where foundations are, there is a high possibility that they will be shaken because they're just based on, somebody's 5-day work, writing some 2-page paper. So there's a lot of scope to go ahead. Okay.